So, Dr. Rand, because you've been doing this for a little while, I wanted to ask you, because the attitudes towards testosterone really changed severely, and the pendulum seems to be swinging back in the other direction. Because I know in the early days, testosterone, even anabolics, they were very easy to come by when I read stories about the 1960s and 70s. Then steroids became kind of public enemy number one, which included testosterone. It was a scheduled drug, although I would love for you to correct me if I'm wrong, but of all the hormones you could potentially inject into your body, testosterone has to be one of the safer ones, especially if you compare it to like insulin and other hormones. But
absolutely.
So, and in some countries it's over the counter. But nonetheless, it became public enemy number one, and doctors were afraid or couldn't prescribe. So if you were a guy and you go to your doctor in the 1980s or 90s, they test your testosterone, it's in the floor, you're not doing very good. They're super reluctant to even prescribe it. Now we see TRT facilities are popping up everywhere. What changed in that? Like, what happened to where it was like you could not get any hormone replacement, and now it seems to be much more available?
I got a few answers because you got a few questions in there. I hope we can keep track of this and come back when I get lost on a tangent here. But I mean, starting with, any of these substances were banned as of the '76 Olympics. Okay, that's where things definitely changed.
Was that when the East Germans showed up and just crushed everybody?
Well, okay, you can blame it on them, but Al Order was given special dispensation for I think it was his last Olympics because he had been on anabolics for so long, and it was legal to compete on anabolic steroids again prior to '76. That the assumption was okay, you use them, now you're dependent upon them. So it's my understanding he got special dispensation for his last Olympics. That might be a fairy tale, I don't know, but again, the point is, it wasn't a problem until that point. And then, everything changed. Now, why it became public enemy number one, and not number one, but it was up there at the top of the list, right? I couldn't tell you. I have no idea. Why has, and I don't mean to, I'm just picking one, and I don't have a special thing in my heart about marijuana, but, we saw movies from, I guess, the 50s and 60s, Reefer Madness, and I've never seen the movie. I've just heard about it where, you smoke pot, it's going to lead to heroin addiction, and you're going to jump off a building one day and kill yourself. So why, and we know better. Well, who dreams this stuff up? With testosterone, like you say, it's probably one of the safest hormones out there. It's definitely, you mentioned insulin. Insulin can kill you. No doubt. I've never seen a case where testosterone killed anybody. Estrogen, can kill you. Certain forms of estrogen are associated with prostate cancer and all kinds of estrogen-sensitive cancers in females. So, why it became such a why it developed such a stigma, I couldn't tell you.
Lyle Alzado, was he a big part of that?
I remember that.
Yeah, they pointed him as that was a big problem with his health, was that he was a big steroid user.
Yeah, I got to be careful here because of legal reasons, but I would argue that that was not the cause of death for Lyle Alzado, and I probably should leave it at that. But there's certain stigmas with certain diseases that I think he may or may not have. And I'm speculating here. Let's make it clear so none of us get in trouble. But Lyle was a great guy. I knew him from Golds, and he was a super loving guy. But if you look into some of the things that were associated with his death, it might have been something else that caused him. I know of nothing that testosterone would have contributed to the things he died of. What would that be? Brain cancer, I've never heard of a testosterone stimulating brain cancer or perpetuating it. I mean, it's just, like you said, it's a very safe hormone. So don't know about that. But then, there was 3 parts to your...
Yeah, so it was because it became like this enemy drug, and it was thrown in the category of steroids, so testosterone being technically a steroid as well. It was impossible for men to get treated for low testosterone, or even people weren't even aware that there could be an issue. Now it seems like the pendulum has kind of swung where where it's people are more aware, there's more facilities available. Is this because of that there's so many men now with testosterone issues, or have they changed the laws, or what has caused this pendulum start to kind of swing the other way?
Well, I think public demand. I mean, I can tell you that, for example, I had a young lady in my office who brought her mom in. For whatever reason, they only had one car, and she was along for the ride. And mom was in her 70s, and this gal was probably in her early 40s. And she had low testosterone, was complaining of all kinds of symptoms of low testosterone. And just out of politeness, I looked at mom and asked her how she was doing. And she said, I'm fine. And I said, nothing like your daughter here, none of these symptoms. She says, no. Then 90 days later, daughter comes back with mom again for the follow-up. And I, being polite again, asked mom how she was doing. And mom wasn't doing so well. All of a sudden, she had all the symptoms that her daughter had complained of earlier. My point being that, the humans are pretty phenomenal creatures in a lot of ways. If there's nothing you can do about it, if you've got an ounce of character, what do? You
just deal with it.
You muscle up and deal with it, right? So mom had been doing that because her generation, in my opinion, did not have these options, right? Like you said earlier, it wasn't really available. Certainly not to women is a better example. And now she sees her daughter getting better, and all of a sudden, well, yeah, I'd like to get better too. It's probably going on at least subconsciously. And this is typical. And I think with guys, now that we know, hey, it's not this public enemy, testosterone replacement, and my buddy down the street is using it, or my buddy in the gym is using it and doing so much better now. I can see it. That's how I found out about it. I asked him, I said, dude, what are you doing? Right? And he found out about it. So public demand is leading that charge, certainly. Okay. Also, doctors. I mean, I got a lot of patients that are doctors. They're finding out about it and they're going, well, this is a great way to help my patients. This is a great way to make a living. And come on, I have a great job. I don't have people complaining about major problems. They're not on 26 medications typically. They're people that are trying to get even better in terms of health and optimizing it. So what a great way to make a living. So more doctors are incorporating it into their practice. It's now being covered oftentimes by insurance. Even the HMOs of the world are sometimes covering it. The problem there is, to get to another problem, is before you have doctors looking at reference intervals. And those reference intervals for testosterone are very broad.
Yeah, so explain that reference, because I know I look at the numbers, I'm like, it's like between 300 and 1,200. It's like, that's a big difference.
Well, that was another thing that you blew my mind and corrected me on too, was the other place, we always talked about this generic range, right? They would tell me like, 400, I think, to 1,200 of free testosterone is this kind of optimal, or total testosterone is this optimal place to be. And I remember you telling me that, yeah, but there's other factors I'm looking at on your blood work that are actually more important. Go into that a little bit. You remember that conversation?
Yeah, no, because I have it frequently, fortunately or unfortunately. First of all, I don't know where they're getting those reference intervals from. And I see it all across assays. Nowadays, for example, you can see a cholesterol reference interval that is nothing close to whatever they want to call it, normal, because I see these assays day in and day out, and 0 to 99, I'm going to forget the units of measurement right now, in terms of, say, LDL cholesterol, is not normal. Okay, so where they're getting those reference intervals, I couldn't tell you. Unless you're on a statin or getting chased by lions on the Serengeti Plain on a daily basis, you're not seeing somebody below 99 typically. When it comes to testosterone, again, I have no idea where they're getting those numbers from. They have adjusted them, by the way. Some companies from that, it was like 1197 LabCorp used to have as the top of the range. That's unusual. Now they've clipped it back to somewhere in the 900s, I believe. Okay. But the point is, to your point, I think this is the question you're asking. First of all, even if that were normal, so what? As I like to joke with, but make a point with my patients, it's normal to get sick and die one day. Who cares about what's normal? Yeah. One day, 0 is going to be normal for you because you're going to be 6 feet under. Nothing's working right. Yeah. What we want to concentrate on, I would think, in medicine is what's optimal. Yeah. What's the best thing for you? So if you see someone, and this is typical, my typical patient, especially coming from an HMO or a doctor that hasn't been educated in this yet, they look at your labs and they go, okay, for example, in your case, you're saying that the reference interval you saw was 400 and above was normal. Okay, you're at 450. Big whoop, right? At the end of the day, what do you treat? The numbers of the patient. Right. If you're still having issues, complaints, then the numbers are to be used as guidance. If you had 1,100 total testosterone, and more importantly, by the way, your free testosterone was commensurate at, say, 22 picograms per milliliter, then you go, probably not testosterone that's causing you the problem. Makes sense, right? Because that's pretty flush. That's a nice level of testosterone. You might look at other reasons for a lack of energy, a lack of libido, et cetera. Or lack of body composition, quit eating the cheeseburgers all the time with the milkshake and supersize and all that stuff. You get my point.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that's probably the other problem that has started to change is that doctors are realizing, the reference intervals are just that. They're there for reference and support or subtraction from a diagnosis rather than a rigid level. And one of the guys that helped that immensely was a guy named Abraham Morgenthaler, who wrote a book, Testosterone for Life, I believe was the name of the book. And earlier in his career, he had set a limit. I think it was 450, as a matter of fact, for total T. Didn't even concern himself with free T. And then finally, in an international consensus, I think from 2016, said, hey, it's not about the number. It's about the patient, which is kind of a duh, right? You would think. Anyway, things have changed because that's now published, and he's a big shot in the industry. He's got a much better resume than I do. I think he's an associate professor with Harvard, and so that's helped things a lot too, I think.
Yeah, I remember reading years ago, because obviously I've been in the fitness space now for decades, and what we used to hear all the time were the dangers of high amounts of anabolics or high amounts of testosterone. And this was popular media, how bad it is for your heart, how bad it is for your health. And then I remember reading actual scientific articles. This was a little later in my career, and seeing, and I had no idea. I had no idea that low testosterone had severe health longevity effects. Can you go into that? It's like, because I think a lot of us think high testosterone is really bad, but on the other end of the spectrum, and maybe we can get into that, like high testosterone, is that really bad? But let's talk about the low testosterone and what that could, besides feeling like crap, besides having low energy, low confidence, low libido, what are the health risks of having just low testosterone?
Let's definitely come back to the risks of high levels, okay? Yeah. But because first of all, the definition of high should be defined.
Okay.
Or undefined, at least in terms of the reference intervals that we have currently. And there's other factors that come with high levels of testosterone use in the bodybuilding community. But to answer your question, absolutely. We have studies that go back, I think as far as the 1950s, showing a correlation between low testosterone and things like coronary artery disease, type 2 diabetes, colon cancer, prostate cancer, osteoporosis, okay? And that's other than prostate cancer in both men and women.
Dementia and Alzheimer's too, I just read recently.
Which adds up, right? I mean, you can start drawing all kinds of, and again, I use the word carefully, correlations, because look, if you had low testosterone, for example, given all the other things you do for your fitness and your health, more than likely, you're not going to have an issue with type 2 diabetes, for example, or coronary artery disease, okay? Although there are other factors that play in. And that's the thing, it's multifactorial. So we're always generalizing, which is important to include in the discussion, and any discussion that's medical. Everything should be individualized. But I'm going off on too many tangents, I apologize.
No problem.
We know, generally speaking, though, that there is a correlation, and when we correct these things, life gets better and the likelihood of some of these disease states decreases. That's a given, okay? So, yeah, there have been some studies, so-called studies, that have raised the attention. And if you remember, maybe 6-7 years ago, I'm terrible with time, but on ESPN, every 15 minutes, there was an advertisement for a class action lawsuit. If you or your loved ones have been involved or been prescribed testosterone, do you remember those?
No, I don't remember that one, but I know the commercials.
I do, because he didn't watch ESPN.
Well, it was based on, I believe, 2 studies, one of which I remember, it was a VA study, which I'll just stop there, right? But no, going further, they used a cream. And by the way, the upshot of this study was it increased the risk of heart issues, mainly coronary artery disease. So one of the knocks, and I'm not suggesting that this is true necessarily, but one of the knocks on the VA system is there's very little follow through, and they in some instances, I mean, there's some great counterexamples to this, but in a lot of areas of the country, the care is not that great. So anyway, you have a guy who jumps into this study and they give him a cream. There's no way to determine if the patient was compliant. So he might have said, okay, yeah, I'll do this, and got his other meds that same day. but got maybe to the front of the line because he participated in this study. I don't know. I don't want to speculate any further than I am already. But then 3 months later comes back, applies the cream that day because he knows he's getting tested. Again, no assurance of compliance. But the treatment was ridiculous based upon what we know now. It was like, some of these, and I won't name names, but some of these branded gels and creams that, don't even have enough in them. The dosing is not even sufficient for a female in most cases. So they weren't being treated really. We can't be sure that even with the treatment they were given, they were compliant. And here's the kicker. These guys in this study were all in line for cardiac catheterization, meaning they were already heart patients. Oh. And yet it was published, in peer-reviewed journals. A bunch of us got together, and of course, once we saw this, and it takes, months, if not years, to reverse some of the stuff, objected. The study was retracted. The journal was spanked for even publishing it. And, there you have it. There you had people that were, and this is, I called one of my best buddies in the whole world who happens to be a PI attorney. I said, and it happens to be on, I'm not going to name his name because he happens to be on therapy. Excuse me. And I said, friend, what's going on here? And I started off on a rant. He says, whoa, Rand. He says, it has nothing to do with the medicine. It's a class action lawsuit. That's the brass ring for an attorney. Okay. They got a lot to win and very little to lose. So that's how these things get perpetuated. And, patients of mine, either that were already on therapy or that were thinking about it, are coming in and going, what's going on here? I heard it can cause heart problems. And you got to back through, over 70 years worth of research and undo all that because of one lousy, irresponsibly published study. It's remarkable. And I say 70 years because we've known since the 1950s that this stuff not only works, but is very, very safe. We've got plenty of studies that go back that far.
Wow. No, so now let's go back to the high testosterone fears it's dangerous to have too much, or taking too much can cause problems. Let's talk about that. Maybe, I guess, paint the context. What would you consider too much? Would it be out of range, or does it depend on the individual?
There have been no studies that I'm aware of that use dosages that we might find in your typical bodybuilder program in a prescribed, if you will, in a gym, right? So that's kind of hard to answer on one hand, but having seen all this, go on in a gym, a couple things come to mind. First of all, there's, in terms of we don't have a formal study, but even in terms of analyzing this, we don't know what those guys are getting necessarily. This is all bootleg pharmaceutical stuff, right? And based on what I've seen, a lot of this stuff is stepped on because guys will come to me and say, Doc, what comes here stays here, right? They're afraid that I'm going to report them or something like that. Yeah. And they'll tell me what they're doing. It's impossible, especially based upon your laboratory assays. So there's definitely evidence that whatever they're getting in the gym is not necessarily what it's supposed to be.
Interesting.
So you'll hear about guys doing 3 grams of something a week. That's impossible. It's just not going to happen. But even if they were, back in the day, you hear stories of guys doing, how do you substantiate these stories? Guys doing 1 gram or 2 of something a week. Okay. Even if you were, the risks of excess testosterone or certain anabolics would be conversion to other substances like excess estrogen or dihydrotestosterone. And as you know, certain anabolics will not convert to DHT or estrogen. So even those are limited. The other risk that most doctors will talk about, and this opens up a whole other can of worms, is and it's rare you can say this in medicine, every anabolic steroid comes with side effects to raise so-called bad cholesterol, LDL, and I say so-called for a reason, and lower so-called good cholesterol. And so that's a major reason why in practice, if some doctor were to prescribe an anabolic steroid, they will typically always weigh risks versus benefits, but pull you off after, say, 3 months and watch for your lipid profile to reequilibrate. Why, I couldn't tell you. Unless you have established coronary artery disease, it makes no difference. And this goes off into another conversation about lipids and how we look at things for the last, again, 70 years incorrectly when we evaluate someone's lipid profile.